this brings us to
get
this
something
question of
open.
accommodationism. What do you think
Oh
that is?
God,
And do you think there is such a thing as accommodationism? Are you an accommodationist? What do you feel about that label,
I
the
don't know
Harvard
what it is
Humanists?
anymore. I mean, I really don't know what it means anymore. I understood what it meant when it was a very specific thing regarding how you talk about science education. I think that's kind of where the term started, as far as I understand. That some people thought that um, faith and evolution are not, evolution and I don't understand where it started. Faith and science were not compatible, and some people say, well, religion and science are compatible. We shouldn't say that they're not compatible because that will stop religious kids learning science. That may be a very brutalized version of the truth, but that's kind of where I understood that, the difference between P.C. Myers' view and Eugenie Scott's view on that specific issue. And I understood people on one side that issue, on Eugenie Scott's side, being called accommodationist. I actually, just for the record, and I'm glad we have this on video, I kind of agree with P.C. Myers. I mean, I think that ultimately, a scientific or broadly sort of rationalistic view to the world, it excludes faith-based reasoning as an epistemic process, and it excludes God. I mean, I just think it's not reasonable to believe in God, and I'm very open about that. Um, so I kind of agree with him. So I'm not an accommodationist in that sense. It seems to have broadened its meaning out and is used as a sort of term of abuse towards people who are who are perceived to be in some way too um, uh, polite to religious people, open to religious ideas or practices. Um, I don't exactly know what it means anymore, and I've started just asking people, well, what do you mean by that? You say that. Um, I mean, I am very clear in my own mind what I believe, right? And people can talk about that using whatever label they want. But I think that religious privilege is really dangerous. Like the way that religious thoughts and practices and educational processes and things like that are privileged over non-religious ones is a real problem, and it causes a lot of harm, and we need to do away with that. I think that the metaphysical beliefs of basically all religions are false, and I think that we can be open about that and challenge them. Um, I think that we should engage in that cultural conversation in a way that is, and this is a weird thing to say, but is more vigorous than humanists currently do, in the sense that I don't have any problem with proselytizing or being sort of evangelical. Like, I want more people to take on humanist ideas and principles, so I'm going to go out there and try and convince them to do so. I would like them um, I mean, ultimately, I would like them to become humanists. I mean, I would prefer people become humanists in terms of taking on the fundamental core values as I understand them. At the same time, I think we need to be less aggressive than we often are, because I think often we do go into this thing of essentially implying or suggesting that religious people are stupid for believing and doing the things that they're doing. And very often that is obviously not the case. So I think that's very problematic from sort of ethical reasons, for persuasive reasons, because I don't think it's persuasive. And finally, I am interested in intelligently investigating what religious communities actually offer people, because it seems to me very clear that people get things of value from religious communities that they can't get currently from the secular world. And I don't think there's any shame in that. I don't think that people who sort of never go into a church except to get married or to have a funeral are being particularly irrational. I think that they recognize that there are spaces there that offer them something that they need that they can't get elsewhere, and so they gravitate towards those spaces. I think the correct response to that issue is to provide secular spaces that do that fulfill the same needs, even if in very different ways, and not to constantly berate people for having human needs that they have. I think that's kind of not a winning strategy. Um,
Do you want to create a new
so
religion?
I don't know what people mean by religion. I think we've got all the resources. No. I mean, that's what. No, I don't. In my understanding of that word, I don't. Um, I think it'd be extraordinarily pompous for anyone to say that they want to create a new religion, although people have done. um, what I want to do is um, uh, let's just take a specific example. One thing I think that religious communities are often very good at is providing people space for existential reflection. And what I mean by that is thinking about what is my purpose in life? What's my role in the world? How should I live? Sort of ethical questions. And a sermon on Sunday is a way to engage with those sorts of questions, which isn't really replicated in much of the secular world. Like, where else do you go to sit down and listen to someone talk about what can be quite interesting ideas and to really ponder them? And,
Philosophy classes.
well, sure, if you're lucky enough to be in the vicinity of a university or a
Right.
student, right? Yeah, sure, that's great. I mean, people often tell me that universities are the secular equivalents of churches. Yeah, except that you kind of have to pay to go, and there's this
Right.
huge barrier to entry for people who are not particularly educated. Like, one of the nice things about many religious communities is that they really engage people in existential and ethical thoughts um, at a level that's understandable for many people. So through the use of parable and narrative and things like that. Um, and I kind of think that's valuable. I derive value from it. I actually often go to religious communities just to see what's going on, and I often find them very valuable experiences, and I'm not going to apologize for that. I find it thought-provoking. Yeah, I disagree with almost everything they say often, but I still find it a valuable experience. So my question is, well, how can we provide a similar sort of space for existential questioning, for ethical exploration, sort of things like that, in the secular world? Now, that doesn't mean I want to create a church for atheists. It doesn't have to look anything like a church. I don't see any reason in principle why it might not look something like one, just because I don't think that just because something's been used by a religion for a long time makes it necessarily tainted, you know? But I don't think it has to look like my idea of what something like this would really look like is kind of like it would be cool to have a TED talk, like 20 minutes, like high energy, really interesting audiovisual stuff to help you follow along on a really interesting topic, and then a discussion with the person who presented it, so it's not just one person presenting it, and then some time to socialize and to engage with other people.
But
And
you
maybe
also
some
want
music at some
rituals,
point.
right? I mean, don't you also want to work
Well,
on rituals and music? And then the question really becomes this. To me, the question becomes this: is that where I see the value of a potential for, call it religion, call it replacement, salvaging the good parts of religion. But what I find that what religion does is it takes people's philosophical view of the world, it gives them an access to philosophy, but it also interweaves that with real practical ethics, parenting in coordination, rituals, identity, all
yeah,
of these things getting together. Now the music, so it engages the whole person and integrates a philosophy with a way of life and with a community and with an identity that
yeah,
reinforces that philosophy. Now that's great if the philosophy is right. But the problem is that philosophy, when done well, is also dialectical and constantly moving and changing. And yet those other aspects of religion seem to pull away from the dialectical moving and changing because they kind of instantiate things in the rituals and in
yeah.
the ethical precepts, etc. Although rituals maybe could then have constantly adapting meaning, and symbols and parables are nice in religion because they allow for reinterpretation. They're not strict propositions. But how
Hmm.
do you deal with the way that integrating all those things makes it harder to criticize any one of them for a given
Yeah,
person?
yeah.
And how do you pull away from the way that the irrational factors, rhetorical power, music, ritual, binding someone to their identity, the ways all those things make it harder for someone to change a philosophical position which is connected to all that deep in their psyche?
That's a really fascinating question. I mean, firstly, just before I answer that question, I should say that my stance towards ritual is sort of I'm an academic, right? And I work in the area of aesthetics a lot of the time, and I'm interested in ritual from an academic standpoint, and I've written a lot about it, and I'm interested in exploring it as a set of ideas and practices that human beings have done since there have really been human communities. Like some of the things that is characteristic about human behavior is ritualized behavior. So I find it fascinating. That doesn't mean I necessarily want to do it all the time. Like I, I, I like to think about it. I like to write about it. I think it would be interesting to explore it, but I am very skeptical. Like, I think there are serious dangers, and some of the ones that you've described, and some other ones too. And so I'm much less ritual happy than sometimes people assume, because I mean I'm willing to talk about these things, whereas other people I think would say, well, why would you even talk about that? Yeah, but I'm not super excited about the possibilities of like a highly ritualized structure. I think though um, that basically, I mean, the answer to your big question about how do you stop this whole structure of interweaving elements sort of ossifying and becoming resistant to change, I think you can. I hope you can just bake like questioning and fallibilism right into the mix, right? What if? Wouldn't it be cool if that was whole part of what the whole thing reinforced? Like I think you can have rituals, for example, that reinforce a questioning and skeptical. I don't state of mind. I don't actually think that's sort of oxymoronic or impossible combination. I mean, I think you could even have questioning rituals. In a sense, some of the rituals that exist are forms of questioning rituals, like things like carnivals and topsy-turvy days that human beings have been going in for a long time, are sort of forms of questioning rituals. I mean, yeah, they serve mainly to reinforce the norms that exist in the rest of the year, right? But in a sense, there are times when people are explicitly encouraged to challenge certain structures that exist and to reinvent them. I mean, there was, while I was back in London a few weeks ago, they had the Slut Walk, which is renaming itself in America at least. I'm not sure whether it's still called the Slut Walk in England. But those sorts of things, pride parades are an example. They're rituals, right? By my definition, they're absolutely rituals. A pride parade is the ritual. No, like this is a repeated, mainly symbolic activity that's trying to communicate some idea.
Costumes and everything.
Yeah, and people dress up for them. And often it's a way of challenging certain forms of norms, particularly at the beginning, less so now, and people get worried about that. But when you get people, a lot of drag, a lot of people dressed in very little on the street, these are ways in which we actually scrutinize and question certain assumptions we have about sexuality, about gender, about the performance of sex in public, and things like that. Now, I see that as a very positive form of ritual. I would not think the world would be better off without pride parades. I think that would be terrible. And I actually think that the great benefit of creating something new, creating new communities, rather than adapting a religious tradition, which is not something I'm interested in. Because this is the question that everyone asks me, well, why don't you just be a Unitarian Universalist? Because the great benefit of starting something totally new is that you can be constantly reflective about what you do and don't do. You don't have a tradition that you're beholden to, so you can say, okay, that didn't work, throw it out. And I just, in sort of a professional way, I want to try and convey a sense of how this works, because people have this, I think some people in the blogosphere have this idea of the community at Harvard as this highly ritualized, kind of slightly churchy place. And that could not be further from the truth. I mean, what we actually do is we get together, we have some food, we usually have a talk or presentation, we discuss it, and then we go home. That's literally it. That's what happens when you visit the humanist community at Harvard.
That's now, the public story.
That's and the sacrifices and all that stuff. We don't tell you until you pay us a lot of money. We're basically the model of Scientology. So that's what really happens. Now, sometimes we try new things, and one time we tried to start with a song. Like, it was an appropriate song in relation to the topic. It was a song about love. It was a song everyone would know. It was like, all you need is love. And so we thought, oh, we'll hand out the thing, the sheet, the words, and everyone will sing it, and then we'll go into our session about love, and it'll be really fun. It was sort of the neuroscience of love. It'll be a fun way to start. Oh my God, it was a disaster. It was embarrassing. Like, no one wanted to do that. And everyone was so nervous about it. And we were like, okay, we're never doing that again. So we are playful, like, with what we want to do. We try and experiment with different forms, different, very simply, different ways of organizing a discussion, different ways of having people ask questions, because we always find it's the same people asking questions, so we think, well, how can we change that? But we're reflective about the process. And so I think that I kind of think you can bake skepticism into a kind of whole worldview reinforcing structure. And That's one of the neatest things about humanism. If you read the humanist manifestos, each one begins with a very explicit statement. This is not a dogma. You know,
Right.
this is what we believe to be true at this time, and we might change it. And they have changed. You know, they're very different from each other. And I think that that is a value. Skepticism and questioning is a value that you can reinforce like other values. And I don't think that there is a contradiction between having a community that reinforces values and reinforcing the values of skepticism and flexibility of mind. So I hope that there isn't really a contradiction there, although I see why
Yeah.
people might think there is.